three divers were preparing to make their way through one of the most dangerous sections of the cave, a tight, U-shaped bend. Then, suddenly, they saw a human body lying directly in their path. The body was blocking the only way forward. One of the divers became overwhelmed by panic and eventually lost his life. Another managed to squeeze past the body and continue forward. The third diver turned around and started swimming back toward the exit. But just when he thought he might make it out alive, he discovered something horrifying. The entrance to the cave had already frozen shut. So whose body was blocking the passage? And would the other two divers make it out alive? Today, we're going to uncover the full story of the Plura Cave. Diving disaster, a terrifying incident that made headlines around the world. Plura Cave is located in the Rana Valley of northern Norway. The cave system stretches for roughly 3 kilometers, with its deepest point reaching more than 130 meters below the surface. It is considered one of the deepest and most complex underwater cave systems in the Nordic region, and what's even more remarkable is the water temperature. Throughout the year, the water stays between just 2 and 7 degrees Celsius. Yet, visibility can remain incredibly clear, allowing divers to see as far as 100 meters underwater. Because of these extraordinary conditions experienced, cave divers from around the world have traveled to Plura Cave in search of adventure. There are 2 main ways to enter the cave. The first route begins beneath the Plura River. The terrain is relatively flat, and the underwater route is easier to navigate. That's the route most divers choose. The second entrance is hidden high up on the mountain. To reach it, divers have to carry all of their equipment down more than 100 meters through a dry cave before reaching the underwater section. Because this route is extremely difficult, almost nobody used it for years. Divers continued using the easier entrance without any major accidents. But that changed in 2013. To finish, divers decided to abandon the usual route and begin their expedition through the dry cave entrance. As they explored the complicated underwater passages, they discovered a narrow tunnel connecting the 2 entrances. They successfully traveled from the dry cave to the underwater passages and eventually emerged at the mouth of the Plura River for the first time. Someone had completed the entire route between the 2 entrances. Their achievement quickly made them famous in the cave diving community. Exactly 1 year later, on February 5th, 2014, 5 divers gathered at Plura Cave. This time, they were preparing for an even more ambitious challenge. Their names were Patrick, Hutaranen, Yusimki, Visa, and Kai. All 5 were highly experienced professional divers, and they were certified to use closed-circuit, rebreather, or CCR systems. Patrick and Kai were the same 2 divers who had completed the route the previous year, but this time, they wanted to do it in the opposite direction. The plan was to enter through the Plura River, travel nearly 3 kilometers through the underwater cave system, and eventually exit through the dry cave entrance high on the mountain. This reverse route was extremely dangerous. One mistake could make it nearly impossible to turn back. Because Patrick and Kai already knew the route, the group decided to split into 2 teams, with the 2 experienced divers acting as leaders. Team A consisted of Patrick and Hutarinan. They would enter the water first so they wouldn't stir up sediment from the cave floor and reduce visibility for the divers. Following behind them, the remaining 3 divers would enter 2 hours later. If everything went according to plan, all 5 would meet beneath the dry cave entrance roughly 5 hours later. The team had prepared extensively for the mission. They carried advanced closed-circuit rebreathers, underwater scooters, and additional gas cylinders. A closed-circuit rebreather removes carbon dioxide from a diver's exhaled gas and recycles the remaining breathing gas, allowing divers to stay underwater for much longer than they could with a standard system. With all this advanced equipment and experience, the team was highly confident. The mission began exactly as planned. Patrick and Hutarainen arrived at the entrance of the Plura River. Before entering the water, they had to break through the layer of ice covering the surface. Using an electric saw, they cut a triangular opening in the ice. The triangular shape was intentional. If the ice began freezing again, the opening would be less likely to seal completely. That meant the divers could potentially return to the surface and break through the opening if something went wrong. At the same time, the 3 members of Team B prepared ropes at the entrance of the dry cave high on the mountain. Once everything was ready, Patrick and Hutarainen entered the Plura River. The first section was relatively flat, making it manageable for experienced divers. They quickly reached the end of the initial passage and entered the narrow tunnel connecting the 2 entrances. Using their underwater scooters, they reached the deepest point of the entire route after about an hour. They were now approximately 132 meters underwater, and ahead of them was the most dangerous section of the entire route, a tight U-shaped bend. Patrick carefully made it through the bend, but when he looked back, his heart sank. Hutarainen was gone. Patrick immediately turned around to find him. He soon discovered Hutarainen trapped inside a narrow crack in the cave. He couldn't move. His arms and legs had become tangled in the guideline, and he was struggling in a state of panic. Patrick tried to calm him down while simultaneously working to free him, even after removing one of the extra gas cylinders. Hutarainen still couldn't get out. His panic continued to increase. His breathing became faster, and his breathing gas was being consumed rapidly. In desperation, he tried to switch to his backup gas supply, but during the struggle, his mouthpiece came loose. At that depth, under enormous water pressure, cold water entered his mouth. Patrick immediately tried to put the mouthpiece back into position, but it was too late. Huturinen had lost his life. More than half an hour had already been lost, and Team B was scheduled to reach this location in less than an hour. Patrick tried to move his teammate's body with him, but despite repeated attempts, he couldn't move it. Then he realized something else. He was already about 20 minutes behind schedule. The decompression time required for his ascent had increased dramatically, from roughly 2 hours to more than 6 hours. But he didn't have enough backup gas to remain underwater for that long. He had no other option. Patrick began ascending. Meanwhile, nearly 3 kilometers away, the 3 members of Team B entered the water right on schedule. Visa and Yusimki moved ahead, while Kai, the most experienced member of the group, stayed behind and monitored the team. At first, everything went smoothly, but when they reached the narrow passage, Visa suddenly stopped. He saw Huturinen's body lying directly in the middle of the route. Visa immediately signaled the others to stop and tried to move the body. Yusimki, who was in the middle of the group, saw the body and became overwhelmed by panic. He began moving around erratically. Kai couldn't clearly see what had happened ahead. All he could tell was that Yusimki was becoming increasingly distressed. Despite Kai's attempts to calm him down, Yusimki couldn't regain control of his breathing. His rapid breathing caused carbon dioxide to build up in his breathing system. Eventually, he lost his life. Now Kai understood exactly how serious the situation had become. Huturinen's body was blocking the passage. Visa was still trying to move forward, and nobody knew where Patrick was. Kai signaled to Visa that they should turn back, but Visa refused. His argument was that the route back was extremely long, and he might not have enough gas to make it all the way. Kai, however, could see that the body was blocking the way forward, so he made a difficult decision. He turned around alone and headed back through the route they had already traveled, hoping to reach the surface and call for help. Visa continued trying to squeeze past the body. He left most of his equipment and several backup cylinders behind. Then, with great difficulty, he managed to squeeze through the narrow space beside the body. He immediately continued upward. Eventually, he found Patrick, who was already performing decompression, because it took Visa about 15 extra minutes to get past the body. His required decompression time increased by another 3 hours, but he didn't have enough gas to complete the full decompression schedule, so he had to shorten the process by about 80 minutes. As a result, Visa developed a moderate case of decompression sickness. Decompression sickness can occur when a diver spends a long time at great depth and then ascends too quickly. At high pressure, gases can dissolve into the body's tissues. If the diver doesn't ascend slowly enough, those gases can form bubbles inside the body, potentially causing severe pain and other serious medical problems. Visa waited for Patrick to finish his decompression, then the two of them climbed through roughly 100 meters of rocky terrain and finally reached the outside of the dry cave high on the mountain. The terrifying reverse direction mission was finally over. As soon as they reached the surface, they called the police and requested emergency assistance. Meanwhile, Kai was still alone inside the cave. He was physically and mentally exhausted. After calculating the remaining distance and the amount of gas he had left, he realized that he also didn't have enough gas to complete a full decompression schedule. So he too was forced to make a direct ascent. Then, another disaster struck. His underwater scooter stopped working. Now he had to make his way through the pitch-black cave alone. His progress slowed dramatically, costing him even more time. By the time he finally reached the entrance of the river, 10 hours had passed since he first entered the water. But there was one final obstacle. The opening in the ice that had been cut that morning had frozen shut again. Kai was almost completely exhausted. Using his memory, he searched for the original cut in the ice with the last of his strength. He broke through the frozen opening and finally reached the surface. He had survived by an incredibly narrow margin. Rescue teams quickly arrived at the scene. The 3 surviving divers were taken to hyperbaric oxygen chambers for treatment of decompression sickness. Meanwhile, additional divers were sent in to recover the bodies. But the rescue team soon discovered that the bodies were trapped in a location that couldn't be reached from the dry cave side. The route from the riverside was extremely long and dangerous. Concerned about the safety of the rescue divers, authorities eventually decided to stop the recovery operation. The Plura Cave system was subsequently closed. The bodies of Huturinen and Yusimki remained deep inside the cold, dark cave. The 3 survivors also struggled to recover from the psychological trauma. Kai developed severe anxiety and eventually gave up diving permanently. Patrick and Visa were also haunted by what had happened. The memories of their friends' deaths continued to return to them. About a month after the accident, Patrick made a decision. He wanted to recover the bodies of his 2 friends, even without official permission. The other 2 survivors agreed to help him. They contacted 17 of the world's most experienced cave divers and returned to Plura Cave with an enormous amount of equipment. They placed around 50 emergency gas cylinders at different depth 6, 21, 56, 90, and 100 meters. The recovery team was divided into 2 groups. One team worked from the riverside, pushing the bodies toward the interior. The second team worked from the dry cave side, pulling them toward the exit. Despite the enormous preparation and planning, the operation took a full 16 days. When the mission was complete, the three men went to the police station themselves and handed over video recordings of the entire operation. Although the recovery mission had been carried out without official permission, Norwegian authorities understood the circumstances and chose not to prosecute them. Patrick was later awarded the White Rose Medal for his bravery. The story was eventually turned into a documentary film in Finland. And that brings us to the end of the story. The freezing waters of Plura Cave reveal not only how vulnerable human beings can be in extreme environments, but also how powerful the bond between friends can become when everything goes wrong. Many people might wonder, why would anyone willingly enter a place this dangerous? But these adventurers aren't simply trying to conquer a cave. They're entering a world completely separated from ordinary life into darkness, silence, and extreme isolation to experience something few people ever will. This is the story of Plura Cave. I'm Moo, and I'll see you in the next episode.